size of my face on this. I promise it looked normal size on the PowerPoint when I made it, but then I saw it blown up on here. So my name is Aaron Groves. I'm from the Cobb County School District at Betty Gray Middle School, and this session is entitled Learning from Each Other, Peer Observations for Classroom Management. So there's a couple of goals that we have for us today. The first is to understand the role of peer observations. Peer observations are teachers observing other teachers in a formative sense, not an evaluative way. That's what peer observations are. It's teachers getting the opportunity to, in a structured way, go and see other teachers doing what they do in their classroom for the purpose of informing their own instruction. So first we're going to understand the role of peer observations, and then we're going to try to gain some effective strategies for how you can bring those to life in your school. In some sense, how you can give teachers the chance to go and see others and provide that continuous growth for them. If you've been a teacher, you've been in other teachers' classrooms, there's things you can pick up and learn from others, but a lot of times we don't have ways to do that in a structured manner. So that's going to be one of our other goals for today. And our third is just to get some tips for building that culture of collaborative feedback, collaborative school culture. Oftentimes we are in our meetings together, we do so much collaboration with our colleagues about everything academic. We steal instructional strategies, we steal resources, we steal all that, but how often do we give our teachers chances to steal behavior management strategies from each other? So that's a big purpose of this peer observation. So this whole practice at our school, at Betty Gray Middle School, was done in conjunction with something called Universal Classroom Supports, which you may have heard of before, you may have done it at your school before. It was formerly known as PBIS in the classroom, so if you're familiar with what that was back before. Really, it's 6 sessions of professional development for your teachers that have a train-the-trainer model. So we, as a small committee at our school, we got together with an assistant principal, a coach, the PBIS coach, a couple representatives from different grade levels, and we went to our district and we were trained on these 6 sessions with the intention of bringing that back to our staff. So we went as a train-the-trainer model. We went to receive this training for ourselves and then ask ourselves, how can we best give this to our staff? How can we bring this to life in our school? So this process of undergoing universal classroom supports set us up to conduct the peer observation. So there's a little bit of a connection there that I want to kind of walk through to show you how we were able to put those 2 things together for us. So when we went for universal classroom supports, we really went with 2 goals. The first goal was directly given to us by our principal. So we had this administrative backing there, and that is that we wanted to decrease our classroom-specific office disciplinary referrals, right? We had a large jump in our office disciplinary referrals. Our staff throughout the year, because our PBIS committee leads some data workshops, had seen those numbers rising throughout the year, and this was a very intentional approach at maximizing the way that our teachers are able to manage their classrooms at a tier 1 level. Our keynote speaker even talked this morning about what we can do to increase the effect size of our tier 1 instruction. That is this exact thing right there. How can we maximize tier 1 capacity for our teachers through this program of universal classroom supports? And then our second one was a team goal that we sort of collected together, which is to kind of build that culture of positive support for our students. So we wanted to kind of have these 6 sessions be towards this collaborative, positive culture and continue to support that process for us. And we also want to collect some data along the way. Throughout the scope of PBIS, a lot of times when we look at our data, we see, okay, our issues are coming from the classroom. What data do we have for our classroom? And a lot of that time it's minor referral data or major referral data, which is good data to use, but it's not really systematic in that it's not implemented the exact same way, because teachers don't always put in referrals in the same way. They don't always follow the flowchart system that we would like for them to follow in those ways. So we wanted a systematic and highly structured way to collect some data as well for our classrooms to see what is really going on there. So as our team went to the trainer model, we as a collective spent 2 days looking at these lessons, receiving this information, finding ways for us to bring this back to our school in a meaningful way. And the first one is that we wanted to take this PL, which was mostly in the form of PowerPoint presentation, and we wanted to make it experiential for our staff. So we wanted to find ways to enhance that professional learning for our staff to make it what we say we want our students to do, which is to have engaged learning. We want to see modeling, we want to see structure, we want to see reflection, implementation, correction. We wanted all that to be a part of our professional learning for our staff. So we're thinking through how are we able to do that. Anyone who has ever given a PL before knows that teachers overall not always the best students, right? Whenever they're in that PL setting. So we're like, okay, let's make this a meaningful thing for our staff. Let's make it systematic in that way. Our second one was we wanted to utilize this inventory data that we had collected. So through our universal classroom support process, we surveyed all of our teachers about what current behavior management practices were in place in their classrooms. And so we surveyed them. This was 100% participation in our survey, and the theme of engagement came through so much, where we're talking about how our students engage, how do we activate them in the learning process, what does that look like? That was a big result from this survey that all of our staff had done, and we wanted to be responsive to that process as well. And then our third one is the one that I would say is just the most important out of all of these, is that we discovered in our conversations with our committee itself that we have so many great teachers in our building that are not involved in the PBIS committee. We have highly skilled teachers all throughout the building. Specifically, we're thinking of those veteran teachers who have been doing this for a long time, who have excellent classroom management, who the kids love, who the kids learn a lot from, but they don't see themselves as a part of the PBIS team or a part of the PBIS process, at least in a direct way, right? They'll do the things that are being asked of them, but they're not a part of our committee, they're not a part of our professional learning. In the way that we provide. So we wanted to access all teachers of our building, whether or not they were on the committee or not, and tap into the skills that they had as well. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about the journey of our professional growth when it comes to coaching and receiving feedback on our classroom management. You start out as a student teacher, and that's great, because you have a mentor teacher. It's very much a coaching process. You're learning what to do. You're finding all these ways to grow. You're receiving feedback. You're a part of that cycle of implement feedback, and there's so much time for modeling growth as a student teacher, and that's great. Then you get your first job as a teacher. You go in your school, you're nervous, but it's your first years, and if you're lucky, you're in a school that has a good mentorship program. If you're not lucky, you're in a school that doesn't have any mentorship program at all, and there's a lot of room in between that of what your first years of effective coaching are going to look like for you as a teacher. So that's a large span of the process, and we wanted to make it a little more systematic in that way. So those are your first years, but then if you think about the remainder of your career, what is left for your coaching process, right? You receive administrative evaluation, which looks really different depending on your administrator. It could have a coaching and supportive tone. It could have a strict and evaluative tone, or it could have a fairly passive tone of not a lot of time with you and your administrator to receive that support and feedback. And then the academic coach varies a lot as well. Your academic coach could be consistently in your classroom providing feedback, or they could not. So it's very possible that for the first 15 years of your teaching experience, you receive meaningful coaching, formative feedback a small handful of times, right? So that's an issue that we wanted to kind of address within our building, to access those highly skilled staff members and allow them to provide coaching and feedback for others throughout the building. So this is kind of where we're going with peer observations and why we wanted to do that. So these are the two parts that we're going to be merging together. This is part one. So we have 6 lessons that we were tasked to deliver to our staff, and we grouped them like this. The first 2 lessons we said we're going to do during pre-planning. So that is the teaching of structure and expectations. So during our pre-planning, we decide as our little subcommittee to roll this out to our staff, and we're going to teach about how we do structure, how kids enter the room, what expectations we teach them day one. We do that really anyways at the start of the year, so we said let's get some purpose to it, and let's do this through our universal classroom supports. And then as the first semester continues, we'll go to parts 3 and 4, which focus on relationships, which focus on engagement with your students, how students engage in the process of learning, and how all of that works. And then last, and intentionally last, when the negative behaviors or the positive behaviors occur, how do teachers respond? So this here is universal classroom supports. This is what we have been tasked to bring to our staff. And so we're looking at this and we're thinking, how can we make this meaningful, experiential? How can we find a way to have our staff be actively engaged in this process? And this is what we came up with. This is like the big idea of the whole thing. This is like the whole crux of this peer observation is what we came up with here. So we have each lesson, the goal is that you receive the lesson, you receive the information, you know what to do, what to look for in other places, and then the first lesson would happen like there, and then you would do your first observation. Where if you're a 6th grade teacher, you observe a 7th grade teacher. And then we'll have another lesson, and then that lesson is going to be about engagement. So your next observation, you're going to focus on student engagement. So the process is receive information, look for that information in other classrooms through observations, have that information be looked for in your classroom when you receive the observation, have a meaningful conversation with the colleague at a peer level who conducted that observation with you, and then go to our next part. So that by the end of this, we've repeated this cycle a few times, and all staff have received and given 3 different peer observations in conjunction with these 6 lessons. So that's kind of the idea of taking these two purposes for our staff and marrying them together to have them be a meaningful process for our staff. So these were our 3 focuses for the implementation plan. First, we want it to be systematic. So as directed by our principal, there's going to be 100% participation in this process. It's not, these teachers have the most referrals, so these teachers are the ones who go and do this thing. It's, we are doing this together, so how are we going to make this happen? So it was 100% systematic. And it was cyclical. Most importantly, it was cyclical, where you receive your information, you observe, you reflect, you receive it again. So we did that process 3 times throughout our cycle there. And then lastly, we spent a lot of time thinking about what is the purpose of doing this. And our original purpose is to decrease office referrals at our school, major disciplinary office referrals. And then we're thinking, how do we do that? We want to improve the tier 1 ability of our teachers to do classroom management. That's the goal. So as this thing ebbed and flowed and changed, and we had these lessons and these lessons, we kept going back to the same thing. How do we get our teachers to reflect and to improve their personal practice? That was our goal, that we kept coming back to time and time again. So earlier I mentioned that we had that intention of collecting a lot of data and getting good data from this process. And when we're creating the form that the teachers would use to fill out during their observation, so if I go back, what you would see each observation, they had an observation form that was dedicated to the topic. So for relationships, we had questions that encourage reflection about relationships. But then when we get to the part of reflecting, we started to think, okay, are we doing this to have our teachers all be little data collectors in the classrooms? Do we want to make it 100% objective so we have really good data for that? Or do we want it to be reflective? And even though we have some good data points that we use, and our committee is using for that, for the most part, the form is intended to be completely reflective, non-evaluative. What can I do differently? What can I share with them to help them in their practice? So that's our goal for the 3. Okay, so to share with you how it went, what happened, how you could possibly bring peer observation to your school in some capacity, we did a self-reflection and a self-rating process. So the small group of people who attended that training and who were in charge of making this whole thing happen, those people sat down and we gave ourselves just a 10-point rating on how we did. We tried to be honest. We tried to be ourselves, maybe are we critical here, are we too lenient here? But we did our best to give ourselves a 10-point rating for a couple different elements to show you how it could look in your school and what parts to think of in your school. Okay, so it takes a lot to manage this change here, and if you have never seen this graphic before, this is like my favorite model flow graphic whenever you're talking about big change at your building. So we gave ourselves a little rating for each of these 5 necessary elements for managing a complex change. So there's 5 here. The first is the vision. That is the why are we doing this, right? What's the purpose of this thing for all of us? Then you have to have skills. These are what the people in your building, what are they able to do? Do they have the understanding and the ability to do what you're asking them to do? Then you need incentives, whereas vision is why are we doing this? Incentives, why am I doing this, right? Why should I participate in this thing? So you need all 3 of those. Then you have to have the resources, which are the physical things that you use to actually do what you're trying to do what you say that you're going to be doing. And then lastly, you need an action plan, which is just the real nitty-gritty, looking at schedules, looking at who's going to do exactly what things. That's the one that took a lot of the work, right? Is the action plan is actually what are we really going to do. Okay, so to play with this model first, before we go all the way through how we reflected on how we did with each other, I want us all to think. This is going to be engaging, just like how we say we do with our students and our teachers. I want you to think right now, what is a current complex change within your sphere, so whether that's local, school, district, whatever it is, a current complex change that you are a part of managing. What is a current complex change that you are a part of managing? And I'm going to give us a few seconds to really think of what that is. Wonderful. Hopefully we all have a complex change we're thinking of that we're a part now. And we're going to do a little strategy that I do with my students all the time. It's called the thermometer. Okay, so the thermometer goes like this. It's 100% participation no matter what. This means 50-50, so you're kind of in the middle. This means that this element of the change is really difficult for you. You're struggling. You're finding a way to do it, but you're struggling with it. This means it's going really well. Okay, so let's see it. Let's see thumbs at neutral, please. Start at neutral. All right, for your complex change, how is the vision going? And then I'm going to show you the average for the whole group. What's the vision looking like for you? Okay, I'm going to say average is right in the middle there. I see a whole range for vision. Okay, what about skills? Do the people have the skills to do what you're asking them to do? Skills is actually a little bit better. Skills is leaning up. That's good. Okay, what about incentives? That's not good. Incentives is all the way down. That's our group average. Incentives is going low. Okay, do you have the resources that you need to do this? Resources. Okay, they're still in the middle. Man, not a lot of. Okay, this is complex change. That's okay. We're mostly leading that. So that's in the middle too. And then our last one, our action plan. What are we really doing? The nitty-gritty. Do we have what we need? Such a range. I was expecting a little more cohesion in the room. Okay, well, that one's kind of in the middle too. Okay, we get the idea though. For each of these, they're all important. Because if you have all five, it leads to success. And what I really love about this model is that it shows you what happens when one goes missing. So you have all four that you need, but you have no action plan. And that leads to a false start, right? And false starts, especially for a program like this one that we were looking at, where we knew from the start that this is an ambitious thing to do. 100% of teachers receiving 6 lessons, conducting 3 peer observations, and getting meaningful feedback, that is an ambitious activity. So we knew the action plan needed to be really strong, right? Because that false start can doom the rest of it, can leave that sour taste, right? So the action plan is crucial. So we spent the most work on this, and in trying to give an honest one, we gave ourselves a really positive score for action plan. We gave ourselves a 10 out of 10 for this one, because we had everything set up. We had 100% administrative support in this process. We had the calendar ready to go from May, from the year before. So we had all kinds of things that were 100% ready for this part of the action plan. You can see the key dates right there. Our staff were given those dates in August at pre-planning. When we did that structure and teaching expectations process, they were given every single day. So there is no part of like, I didn't see this coming, you know? That observation was due today. And then we reprinted this, and at each lesson, we gave them this exact sheet again every single time. So these dates were on the calendar for a long time with very clear windows. And you can see the cyclical process as well, where you receive your relationships lesson in September, and then you've got 1 month to complete your observation about relationships. And it's the same thing for engagement, and then responding to behaviors in that way as well. So there was time in between. This was given directly to the staff in those ways, so we gave ourselves a positive rating. This is the action plan kind of expanded with reminders for the teachers about what should be happening. Links for the observation form were provided. We used vertical plane or vertical alignment to do our observations. So that was another little twist, is that If you're a social studies teacher, I'm in middle school. So if you're a social studies teacher, 6th grade, you go see 7th grade social studies to kind of build upon that knowledge from before. Connections is where it got a little bit tricky, right? They run a weird schedule. So Connections was sort of a little more haphazard, so we kind of had to work with that on the fly. But they were 20 to 30 minutes, and they were done at the end of a grade level time, so it was kind of all a collective responsibility there. So our action plan, we gave ourselves a pretty strong grade. Okay, resources is next. What resources do you have? I remember our average for the resources was right in the middle as a group, because if you don't have the resources, everyone knows what to do, but they don't have the things they need in order to do it. And that is frustrating. We have probably been in that situation many times. We're in public education. We have been in that situation many times before. I know what I need to do. I don't have the things necessary to do it. So that leads to frustration. And this is a running theme. Because of that 100% support of our administrative staff, we gave ourselves a positive resource rating as well. The physical items that the staff received were all given to them at the right times, right? The observation calendar, the strategies of which grade level is observing which other grade level, that was all given to them. And the resources were provided through these forms that we created as a committee. The other resource that I did want to mention that is maybe the most important is just FaceTime with our staff. Our principal gave us 6 sessions of 45 minutes each with the entire staff. That is a huge resource for a process like this. A huge and the most valuable of all the resources. I can't imagine how much less effective this would be if these things were communicated through 5-minute check-ins at staff meeting or just through emails, right? It would be really, really different. And that resource is something that we were very intentional about in our conversations about being good stewards of that resource time for our teachers, right? The way the teachers' professional learning schedules are coordinated is a lot of times without a lot of their input, right? Here's the PL for the year. And so when we have that time as PL, we were very intentional about trying to be good stewards of the time that we did have with them. So that was a big one too. Next is incentives. If I had to give the average for the group, incentives, worst of all of the 5 elements of complex shame. And if there's no personal incentive, you might understand why we are doing this, but you don't understand why you personally have to do this. Phrases like, I don't need this. This is for other people. Those types of things were part of incentives. And as our committee was discussing the ways that we wanted to address the personal incentives of this process, there was a healthy amount of conversation about the people who we knew were going to respond with some negativity to something like this. You want me to take time from my planning to go sit in this other person's class, right? There's a healthy amount of connection and conversation about that, and then there's an unhealthy amount of worry about what people are going to say about doing these different things, right? This is a we thing. We are all doing this. This is systematic. So we're gonna make it as good as we can for it, and we're gonna try to be intentional about using the time wisely that we have. So we gave ourselves the lowest rating for incentives for the personal one. So these were the requirements that we identified that are necessary to feel personally incentivized to participate in this peer observations program. And the biggest one is you have to have at some level a genuine interest in the teaching practices of others, right? Seeing other classrooms, understanding what other teachers do, how those processes work. You have to at some level be motivated to participate in and to see what that looks like, to see how the other side lives, how students react in different places and things like that. That is one level of the personal incentive. And then for some of the teachers that have been doing this for a very long time, those staff members that we wanted to access, those highly skilled ones that do not typically participate in PBIS incentives and initiatives, those staff members, we sort of try to encourage a pay-it-forward mindset, right? You've been doing this a long time. You're an excellent teacher. There's so many teachers that can really benefit from learning from you. And that puts them in a leadership position within this process where they are feeling that all the skills that they have developed over their many years of service and education are valuable to the school, right? It's not just something that you do for your kids. We can use you in this manner as well. So our incentives were the lowest one. And resistance, what it looked like for us, because what happens if you don't have personal incentive is resistance. But instead of resistance as a, raised hands, why are we doing this? Or resistance in the form of complaints that go around the room about different things. The only resistance that we really experienced with this was just incomplete observations, right? That was the form that resistance really took. Because throughout the whole process, nobody ever tried to argue that peer observations is not a positive practice. All right, everyone recognized very quickly seeing other people conduct their classrooms is really helpful for my classroom, right? There was no conversation. We didn't have to convince anybody of that. The only convincing and incentivizing was, why do I need to do this? So that's why we scored ourselves on the lower end. So the incomplete observations first took the form of 3 or 4 days before the observation is due, the PBIS coach would email all the people who had not completed, just as a reminder, and then the day after the deadline, the evaluating administrator would email as a reminder to complete the observation. So we have received for each one 100% peer observation. Our next one is skills. So for skills, if you do not have that, that leads to anxiety, right? So teachers don't know what to do. They don't feel that they have the knowledge or the skills to be able to do the things that everyone else is talking about and that everyone else seems like they have the skills in order to do. And so for this skills category, we gave ourselves an 8 out of 10. The goal for each one is that before the observation, you give them the skills so that they know exactly what's expected, they know what to do, and then they look for those skills in other teachers as a manner of building them for themselves, right? So we gave ourselves a fairly high score for skills. This was one of our engagement lessons. We had simultaneous responses, right? Like the thermometer, that's a simultaneous response where all students can participate at the same time instead of just one student raising their hand, right? Things like that were built into there. And then when teachers go with the form, they go into the classroom, they see engagement. The questions on the form are about how are the students engaging. So they have a very intentional look for whenever they're stepping into that other classroom. Another example would be building relationships, right? We gave specific skills to building relationships, right? Something that a lot of teachers maybe would have considered it just happens organically, but there are very intentional ways that if we implement these as a building, students will feel more supported, they'll feel more connected to the teachers, and that's what reflection really looks like. This was my favorite of our staff lesson building processes, right? We had this model called Tender and Tough, and whenever it comes to staff members considering the effectiveness and the skills and the tools used by other staff members, we had them consider where they would fall on this line or this grid of tenderness and toughness. So if you have a classroom that is very tender, you have a teacher that expresses so much care and concern for their students, but is low on the toughness scale. With the raised hand, what does that classroom look like? This is not simultaneous response. What does that classroom look like? Give me a word. Chaos, right? There's no behavior management. Some kids might feel supported when they get that minute to talk to the teacher, but overall, that's not a classroom that the kids are going to feel safe and secure in. In the same way, if you have a classroom that is really, really tough, but low tenderness, what does that one look like? Yeah, military, right? Yeah, these are the rules. You're not welcome, you either get in, you follow these exact rules. And one discussion that I hadn't even thought of before that our staff recognized is that right here, you get a lot of compliance, but you don't get any engagement, right? So the kids are not learning, right? They're not actually a part of the process, but they're there, and they're quiet, and they're seated, and that is not what's important, right? So the goal is that we can look there, and we kind of developed this is a ring of effectiveness, right? Where you have to be a certain amount of both of these to have a classroom that is operational, where the kids are secure, where the kids learn. If you go too far from one side, it looks a little bit extreme. And the reason that we developed this together is to give those teachers who fall on different parts of the ring of effectiveness a lens to look at others in their building and understand this is where they're coming from. This is why they're trying to do this activity. This is why they're trying to be there. The most interesting part of this whole thing was that we had a four corners little activity during one of our lessons where we grouped the teachers up based on how they said they wanted to learn when they were in school, right? So when you were a kid, how did you prefer to learn? Would you believe all the teachers who are in this high toughness, low tenderness said they wanted independent work and to be left alone by their teacher, right? And then all the teachers that are these highly collaborative classrooms that are a little bit noisy classrooms where all the kids are up and moving around, they were all high tenderness, low toughness side, right? So those were how they said they wanted to learn when they were in school. And to see those conversations play out was really powerful for our staff, right? And understanding of where people are coming from. Okay, the last one is the vision. This is the one that we didn't spend too much time on once the whole thing started rolling, but at the start, this is where all of our focus was coming from. Where we're talking about, why are we actually doing this? And once the vision was set, it was set. This is what we're doing. This is why we are taking a part in this process, right? So the vision is the we. And if there's no vision, if there's no vision, it's just confusion, right? Like, what's really going on here? Whose idea was this, right? Who asked for this? Those types of questions are what happens if the vision is unclear. So the why are we doing this? First and foremost is the principal, right? We had an increase in classroom, office disciplinary referrals. This is our intentional response to that process. And really, no one had a problem. Everybody was like, that is it, yeah. This makes sense, right? This is the vision for this program. This is why we are doing this. And so the way that it happened was through that growth in classroom management. That's our immediate response, is how we can fix this issue, is through that increase in our Tier 1 classroom management strategies, those universal practices. There was a little bit of room, though, for the clarity when it comes to the what we are actually doing in terms of the observation form. So that's why we docked ourselves a little point there for the vision of this process, is that whenever our staff were participating and they were looking for things, that was great, but the actual feedback that we got on the forms as part of the reflection was really varied. So if there's a lesson that we could have learned that I would give, is to model what a reflection can look like on the form as the staff are receiving it. So I want to show you a couple of these response variations, because some of them were a little bit humorous to see how the staff reacted to the different prompts with other ones that they're around. So the prompt was here: think about engagement in your own classroom. What is something you observed that you would like to implement? I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this teacher gave this hyper-detailed response about all these things that she saw in this other classroom that she wanted to implement. Right? She using words like systematic, using words like apprehensive students. She's noticing all these different things as a part of that process. So that's one version there. And then this was another one, right? So there's all over the place, the way the teachers responded there. So we didn't really model exactly, we didn't provide a rubric. We didn't say this is what's going there. The goal was intentional reflection and improvement of your personal ability to manage your classroom. And so we kind of left that freedom out there for it. But if we could run it back and do it again, that's a way that we would have improved in that part. This is another response variation. What did the teacher do to promote student engagement? And this is a core content teacher observing a music class. That was a really interesting parallel to see the way that these connections teachers, art, music chorus, the way that they interacted and worked with the core content teachers was all right there. So that's one response, a lot more detailed, and then a second one, right? Which are just very different approaches. Neither of them in this case are really bad, right? They noticed that they did the whole class response. They noticed a share with your neighbor section. None of those things are negative, but they were just different approaches there. So we knew that some barriers were going to come, and these were the two that we predicted, right? That we, very intentionally from the start, we said these are probably the two things we're going to face, so let's consider some ways that we can attack these barriers, ways that we can address them head on. The first was buy-in, and we had that administrative, principle-based leadership that gave us that push from behind to be able to implement this, and we used that, we targeted the really experienced teachers first. So in our very first lesson about structure, about maximizing structure and teaching expectations, the way that we ran our discussions first, whoever has the most years of experience at your table talks first for these questions. And then we initiated those group discussions. So that put them in a position of influence over the others, and our questions are targeted to bring out the way that they taught expectations to their students on day one. So that's a way that we tried to kind of pull in those experienced teachers first, because they're kind of the culture drivers as well within your school. And then our third one there for buy-in is this was all data-driven, right? This was all based on our office disciplinary referral. This is based on our classroom inventory practices. And everything that we did was for a data-backed reason. And so that was a part of our response to the issue of buy-in as well. And then the next one was clarity. We wanted to make sure that at the end of each session, at the end of each lesson, teachers may not have said, I'm excited, I'm ready to do this. But they could at least say, I understand why we're doing this, and I understand what I need to do, right? That was the minimum that we wanted from each session and each lesson that we had. So there's one little anecdote with that where in the middle of one of the sessions, this was like after 2 observations that had happened, I'm going over 1 or 2 things in our next lesson, and the teacher raises his hand and he says, when am I going to get my score? That was his response. And that was helpful though for the whole group, because that was against everything that we had really tried to put in place here. And when the teacher asked that in front of the whole group, I'm like, this is a perfect opportunity to clarify what the purpose of this whole thing is, right? This is not evaluative. This is not a way where you get your score. What he was looking for is feedback from the person who came to observe him, right? Whatever lesson he had taught, he wanted to know how he did. He was intentional about trying to do it, and that was a great thing, right? So we had left it more open-ended about what the process looks like after the observation, and if we were to run this back and scale it up again, we would have intentional conversations that were in a structured way, but really all that we had done for this is say, if you are interested in knowing about the observation, seek that person out who did the observation for you, and they can share your responses with you, and you all can have that conversation. So that was something we didn't do in a structured manner, but that was a helpful moment in the clarity of the purpose of this whole thing, was answering that question. This is the one that I did not expect to be as bad as it was. Scheduling a middle school, I cannot even imagine high school administrator, like there's so much PL, and we thought we had the whole thing too. Because remember I said, in May, we had all those dates that were lined up, and they were all nice and pretty, but then all of a sudden we have STEM PLs, then we have vocabulary PLs, then we have these days off, then we have these things. So scheduling gets a little bit wonky. So we were generally flexible in the way that we accepted those things, but when it came to the deadline of the peer observation, we kept that one pretty sharp. Right? Like this is 100% participation, this is systematic, we have to make sure we get it done. So that was our process there for the scheduling. But that was a part, getting that time with the principal early to have the calendar all flowed out, that was a really key thing for us. And then the results. So there's a couple of results that we're very proud of. The first one is that our rollout for the year was very purposeful, right? We do PBIS rollout every single year, and every year I kind of change it and I find new little ways, but this rollout, there was no question about what we were doing. We're introducing this thing, we're teaching our first couple lessons, and that was a big part of it. And then this is the big one. We have had a really steep reduction in office disciplinary referrals. And it would be too much for me to say, we had all these referrals, then peer observation started. Now we have way less referrals, but it's a part of the process, and it has been a big thing for us. And when I say we've had steep reduction, it is over 50% for each month. It's a huge, huge reduction. Right? It's been a very, very big part of it. So in every single month so far, from August all the way through where we are now, it's been a really big thing. And that's those positive practices, impacting the classroom culture, all being a part of this process of universal classroom supports being married with peer observation. That result is good. I'm glad I got a couple of classes, but this is the actual one that I'm much more proud of, because this one is a lot more systematic data that we have here. So each year we get a district walkthrough, and when the district walkthrough happens, our district coach always asks the teachers, what PBIS strategies do you use, or how do you use PBIS in the classroom? And most of the time the teachers hear PBIS, they see this person from the district, and they're like, oh, points. I give points every day. I give points every third day. This time, though, they said things like, I teach expectations before we do a partner lesson, right? We use our minor referral data to decide how to intervene with students. We build relationships. These are the engagement strategies I use. So all of those core components of PBIS, not just the acknowledgement system, were being mentioned by our teachers in response to that question. And even though the office disciplinary referrals, that's the original goal, that's good, this is the one that we're very proud of, is that our teachers' understanding of PBIS was shifted through this program. And that's a really, really big deal. I've said it so many times to the staff, but this is how it really sinks in, that PBIS is not a piece of candy that you give to the kids when they do the right thing, right? It's a structured system to build mastery of behavior expectations for your students. That's the whole process that is there, and it's the school-wide process as well. So when you treat it just like that little candy, here you go, there you go, here's your PBIS point, the kids lose interest, the staff loses interest, and that defeats the whole purpose, right? So when they're naming these things instead of that, it's a really, really big deal. So that's a shift in teacher understanding. That's the one thing I'm very proud of. Okay, next one is modification. So we did this at the middle school level, but there's ways to visualize doing this in elementary and high school, right? You can have different grade levels do it. In high school, you can have different content bands. However, the plannings are able to work. So there's ways to kind of shift the schedule around to give staff the opportunity to participate. You can also scale this down if you wanted to, right? This was a big endeavor for us. It was a very ambitious activity. It took a lot of time from our teachers that was given to us by our administrators to do this thing. And so we may be thinking like, oh, well, we don't have the time to do this, right? You can scale it down. You can tie it to your mentor program. So every staff member who comes to your school in the first 2 years or the first year that they're there, this is your cycle of teacher observations. This is how you do that. You can also link it to TEKS. Teachers that are receiving lower than desired results on their TEKS can have this as part of their teacher support process of observing other teachers in a structured manner. So these are all ways that it can be scaled down so that it's used for your staff. But then you can also scale it up, right? This could be tied to your school-wide professional goal for the year, right? So you can have all staff. This is what we are doing. And next year, even though we've already done this year, we could run it back again and do the same thing. Maybe change our lessons, but the observations themselves can be very similar in that process. So you can make it just a systematic part of your school. This is just what we do. This is our thing. This is kind of my big thought that I want to leave us with, though, is leadership support, so crucial. There were so many times during this process that we were using the resources that touched every single staff member. And that's a really big deal. Whenever your PBIS team, your PBIS coach is making decisions that impact 100% of staff. So having the principal give the trust to us to do this in a meaningful way was a really, really big deal for us. And so there's other ways to do it without all of those resources, but this was a really big part of why it was so successful for us. So I definitely would like to take some time. If anyone does have any open questions, I'm more than happy if anyone has one. Yes, ma'am.
On one of your slides, you had it where there was a link with the observation forms. There are 3 types. Could we just see one real quick?
That link is not in there, and I'm not logged into this computer. I'm so sorry. I can quickly, it's at the top of the observation sheets. They had little star ratings. So these were in the little tiny rubric to say what it were. Those were the objective ones. The teacher referenced the Falcon 5 expectations. The teacher used a student name. The teacher did this, whatever the lesson was. And then the third, I think it was 4 questions that followed. All were something along the lines of, what did you notice? How would you describe this in this classroom? In your classroom, what did you realize is the strength of your teaching style? Those were all the types of questions that vary based on that. So if you would like to come talk, I can show you our form afterward, but I don't have it pulled up right now. Yes.
Did you have any teachers who started off as heavy resistors who turned into full supporters of the process?
As far as full supporters, not in that way. When you say heavy resistors, though, we didn't experience any of that, though. So there was no one who was like, bad-mouthing or, doing or being really negative in the staff PL. Because like I said with division, everybody understood why we were doing this, right? It was an important thing for all of us to do. So, I'm going to say there's no really positive ones because no one started so low, right? That's probably what it is. Yes.
So for your, I'm just thinking with your classroom supports, are you saying the training, you went through the modules and everything? Did you have your, because that's where we're actually at, we're going to start this year. But I'm in elementary school and we have these reading modules that we have to complete and they have been just fun. And so I teach math all day, every day. I'm an intervention for math, but now I have reading too. But so we didn't end up doing this, which is exactly what we're about to do next year. Okay. So I'm very curious, did you have your staff go through those modules as part of it? I know you said you had the 6 45-minute sessions, or did y'all just take that information and then turn it into your lesson presentation?
Yes, we did not use the modules. No, we received those modules. Our small committee did, so we received all that information. But when it came to how we wanted to redeliver it, the modules weren't as conducive with that process. So that's how we did that. Yeah.
Where do you get those modules?
Georgia Learns. We received them from our district support staff, but Georgia Learns is what they're saying. SLDS Georgia Learns. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
And the person who's doing the reflect
Throughout the process, you would do both 3 times. So you would observe and get observed in each one, but the form is for people to do their observation. So you go to the classroom, you open your laptop, and in the 20 minutes that you're there, you're completing the form while you're in the room.
On your observations, did you just tell me, like, if I was a 6th grade teacher, I had to go to a 7th, or did I have to go to a specific person?
So we use vertical alignment for the core content one. So if you're a 6th grade teacher, you would be observing for the first round a 7th grade teacher. But if you're social studies, you go see a social studies teacher. And that way, if one of the social studies teachers is absent that day or whatever, there's a little bit of choice, but we didn't want to leave it totally open. You can go see anybody on the grade level you want. It does get tricky with connections. I don't know what other middle schools' schedules are, but the connections are on a really different schedule. So for the connections, we directly paired them with a core content teacher to go observe. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time today.